As many of you know, My Jewish Learning has hosted several virtual tours and conversations about diaspora Jewish communities, and most of them touch on the duality of living in a thriving, and most of them touch on the duality of thriving Jewish life with historical tensions of other communities in the area. Today, to commemorate Yom Hashoah, that duality will be all the more pronounced as we remember those who are lost. And no one is better suited to talk about these tensions and history in Amsterdam than Nachshon Rodriguez Pereira, who is the community leader and Chazan cantor of the Bendigamos community in Amsterdam. Before I turn it over to Nachshon to share, and his son Eli, who we're lucky to get a peek of, please note that you are welcome to ask questions in the chat, and we will do our best at the end to answer as many as possible. Again, thank you all for being here, and Nachshon, I will turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mara, and hello, everyone, on this Yom HaShoah. I'm here from Amsterdam, and I'm here with my son, Eli, who is 11 weeks old, but you can't see him because he's not as tall. You may see him later. I'm trying to keep the pacifier in his mouth right now, so he's quiet. And it's an honor to share with you the story of the Amsterdam, the Jewish community during the Holocaust. Mara asked me to speak to you a bit about Jewish life up till the war. Then, of course, some of the things that happened during the war, and also to talk to you about the effects on the community that it has today. It was a lot of things to talk about in just an hour, or even just 15 minutes with questions. So we'll just go right ahead and we'll see how it goes. And if you don't have enough time to speak about everything, then maybe we'll do this another time. I'm going to start sharing the presentation now, and then we can start right away. Okay. Yom HaShoah. On the picture, you see the yearly Yom HaShoah memorial in Amsterdam. And the building was actually a Jewish theater that has been burned almost to the ground, but this is where we usually meet every year. Just now it's being renovated. So tonight it's going to be in the Portuguese synagogue, but this is usually where we commemorate the Shoah evening, Yom HaShoah, with about 2,000 people every year. Okay, so this is just to give you a little bit of an idea of where we are situated. We're in Jewish Amsterdam. Amsterdam situated in the Netherlands or Holland. You can use them both. We have some Jewish politicians here, of course, the Jewish Tsar, the Portuguese synagogue, Spinoza, a very old library from the 17th century, and Frank, the first female student in the Netherlands who was also Jewish, and a theater, and some pictures from the Jewish life before the war, a recent concert, a youth event, and in the lower bottom on the left, we see the first service in the Portuguese synagogue after the war. It was May 9th, 1945. This was the first thing they did. Just 4 days after the liberation, they came together in synagogue and thank God that they were still alive. Just a little bit about me, so you know who's telling the story. My name is Nachshon Rodriguez Pereira. I'm 36 years old. My father is Portuguese Jewish, and my mom is Ashkenazi. My dad's family moved to Holland 400 years ago. I'm married to Alumit, and this is my son Eli. He's 11 weeks. I was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family. You can see me on the picture on the left, pretending to be a Chazan at 2 years old. I started to be a Chazan and a teacher at an early age. In the Portuguese synagogue, I was leading the services and teaching from 2003 till 2015. And then I started my own new Jewish community in 2015. I studied political science, I'm a city councillor now, and I worked at some other places, but now I'm the coordinator of the Jewish seminary and a private educator. I'm still a city councillor actually. And basically my main goal is just to help revive and rebuild the Jewish community in Amsterdam. And this is me with my wife and the little baby last week with his Pesach matzah tie that his mother created for him. And this is a picture from my Patreon. This is Eli in the Portuguese synagogue, where he's part of his heritage with a top hat. So this is basically the center of Jewish life before the war. We're looking at the Portuguese synagogue on the right, and on the left, we see the Ashkenazi synagogue. And in this area, in the center of Amsterdam, over 50% of all the people living there were Jewish. This is what it looks like today. Everyone who has been to Amsterdam and is Jewish has probably been into this area. And as I said, 50% of the people were Jewish. Now it's less than 1%. So just a little bit to give you an idea what the Jewish community was like when before the war started. There was Jewish life already in the Middle Ages, but especially in the 17th century, it went really fast. The first synagogue, Portuguese Jewish synagogue, was already erected in 1602. The cemetery, which is still in use, 1614. Library still in use, now UNESCO World Heritage, 1616. The big Ashkenazi and Portuguese synagogue, 1670s. And the first Jews were active in trade, coffee, stocks, banking, and later in fabrics, diamonds, and they became very active in Jewish society. And the population grew, and 111,000 in 1930. This is Amsterdam and also other cities in Amsterdam. And when the Second World War started, there were 140,000 Jews, 140,000 Jews, of which 102,000 were killed, and some of them were they died afterwards, or they committed suicide, and they're not even counted in these numbers. So it's one of the highest percentages of Europe after Poland. It's a lot of people that were murdered, but also in percentage, it's really a lot. There was also a lot of poverty in this area in the 19th century. And I also wanted to give you a little video, because it gives you a nice, I think, a good feeling of what the Jewish life was like in the 30s. This is footage from Amsterdam from the 1930s. I will show you a minute from the beginning and a minute from the end. You'll notice a lot of Jewish street signs in the area that I just showed you. And also we'll skip to the last part to see what it looked like on Friday afternoon, just before the Shabbat starts.
Is this the little girl I carried? Is this the little boy at play?
I don't remember growing older. When did they?
Okay. Oh, sorry, I pressed the wrong button. Anyway, this was the Portuguese synagogue and its surroundings, the absolute center of Jewish life until the Second World War. But it wasn't just the center of the of Jewish Amsterdam, but really it was the center of Jewish life in the world in the 17th and 18th century. So this is why I chose to show you some parts of this area. So just to give you an idea of what the Jewish community looked like in our whole country, even though it's a very tiny country, if you're in Amsterdam and you take the car and you drive in any direction, north, south, west, or east, within an hour, you are in a different country. So really, it is small. It's tiny, and still all the blue points, pinpoints that you see, all the blue pins, these are Jewish communities before the war. After the war, there's maybe 20 left, and most of them are just more technically there, and they have occasional services, but most of them are completely disappeared. So these were all the Jewish communities. I'm not sure if it will be distributed, but I have a list of suggested readings afterwards, including some links of things that I'm using. I see Mara is agreeing with me. And then you can also see, I'll share this link, and you can click on all the pins and see the history of that city, of the Jewish community, and how many people lived there before the war, and what kind of infrastructure they were having. They were really, almost all of them, complete Jewish communities with everything that you would like to have in a community. So pretty much after the war, almost everything except for Amsterdam was completely destroyed. I want to give you a timeline of things up to the Second World War. I want to start with how Germany lost the First World War, World War One, because this influenced a lot what happened later. They lost the war, and they had to pay a lot of money to the winners of the war, because they started it, and this also led to financial problems in Germany, and also cultural problems, because they didn't like that they had to pay for the war, etc. So this is one of the reasons why it was easier for them to start a second war, because they were very unhappy of how the first war had ended, the First World War. Already in 1925, Hitler publishes Mein Kampf, I think from prison even. And in 1933, he gets into power. And already on April 1st, there's the boycott of Jewish stores. And so we know the war started in 1940 here, and 1939, if you take the invasion of Poland into account. But already in 1933, the Jewish stores were boycotted in Germany. And this leads to Anne Frank, and of course many other people, already moving away from Germany. Also, the grandfather of my wife, he also left Germany as soon as he could. And the racial laws of Nuremberg already in 1935 were also instituted. So basically to apply the laws of race, saying that everybody is Jewish, is from a lower race, and when someone's Jewish, like this already happened halfway in the 30s. 1936 was already the first military action of the Nazis when they invaded some land. In 1938, we had the Kristallnacht, which I'm sure you've heard about. This was mostly in Germany. Thousands of Jewish buildings, synagogues, schools were invaded. They were ruined. They were put on fire, and the firemen were not allowed to extinguish the fires. And afterwards, the Jewish community was fined for all the damage, which was 1 billion mark. So yeah, it would be something like $1 billion today. They were fined for the damage that was done to others, to their buildings. So already completely insane in 1938. And then in 1939, Germany invades Poland. And in 1940, this is when the war starts for the Dutch. Like in Dutch schools, we are learned that the war is from 1940 to 1945 in our country, because this is when they bomb Rotterdam, our biggest city after Amsterdam. It's also our main port for boats and harbor and everything. And our country surrenders already after 5 days. That was it. And from that moment, we were under German rule. On the left, you see a picture of one of the burning synagogues on the Kristallnacht. And on the right, you see a dock worker. This is a monument in front of the Portuguese synagogue to commemorate when some of the Dutch people went on a strike, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a bit. Then the second part of the timeline, and during the war, and I'm not going to tell you everything that happened in the war, of course, because most of you, I mean, we know what happened, but I want to mention just a few specific things. Already in 1940, there was a ban on ritual slaughter in the Netherlands. Jewish clerks were fired, so Jewish people working for government institutions were not allowed to work there anymore. In 1941, Jews were not allowed into cinemas or parks, etc. And this is a big one. February 3rd, 1941, Jews had to be officially registered. And also the first razzia took place in Amsterdam. There was a big strike. That was the previous picture, a big strike on the February 25th, because the regular people in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, they wanted to show their solidarity with the Jews. And they said, you cannot treat our Jews like us. You know, we see them as part of our community. So they went on a strike. And unfortunately, the Germans, they struck back so strongly that after this, people were very afraid to do anything. And eventually this led to the resistance only starting much later in the Netherlands. So the strike was great. And the monument that you just saw was to commemorate this strike. But other than that, because the Germans were so, sorry, Mara, you want to say something? I see you.
Sure. I just wanted to mention a few people in the chat are asking what a razzia is.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking maybe I should mention it. So in the February strike, so it was a good thing that they went on strike, but actually it had really bad results eventually. So a razzia, I think here in Europe, everybody hears about the word. Basically, it's a raid. It's a raid of Germans where they just enter houses or Jewish buildings, and they just take everything inside. They take all the valuables, they take all the people inside, and they take them away, they kill them, or they deport them. That's a razzia. It's a raid. And then in 1942 was the Wannsee Conference, where the plan to really completely annihilate the Jewish people were further discussed and agreed upon. And it says continue on site. I have a website I want to show you where I think it's a very useful timeline. That's nice to see. It is in Dutch, but it has some pictures, and I think even if you speak English, it's helpful to have a look at this site. It's at annefrank.org, and it has a very good timeline. And every time when you see something that you think is interesting, then you just click on it, and it shows you into more detail what happens. For example, this is the star, the Jewish star that was in 1942 was applied to all the Jews. Everybody had to have it. And then you see 1941 on April 1st, we had to have passports, everyone. Jews were robbed. Markets were segregated from this moment. From September 1st in this year, Jewish children were they had to go to separate schools. And then 1942, January 10th, Jewish men were sent to working camps. And here the Jewish star was in May 1942. So I think it's a very good good timeline. It's very useful. There were a few that I wanted to show you here. The resistance here in 1943 actually has an attack on the register of the people in Amsterdam. One of the things that was very typical of the Netherlands is that it's very bureaucratic, and that it has everything is very organized. It still is, but also already back then, everything was very organized. And the Nazis were able to kill so many Jews because everything was registered. Everything was registered everywhere. So that's why it was, that's why the resistance decided to deal with them like this. Then already in 1943, all the Jews had to be deported from Amsterdam. So it's pretty, yeah, it's early in the war, and they were actually able to do that. They were almost able to get all the Jews out of Amsterdam. What they did was, in the Netherlands there was a camp called Westerbork, and they collected them there, and from there they would send them to concentration camps in Eastern Europe. They started bringing them to Auschwitz in July 1942. So I mean, I think that's also, if you have more time and you want to go to this website, even though you don't speak Dutch, I think it's very useful to just go through this, because there's of course so much information about what goes on in the war. Something that I wanted to show you here is the Jewish children that were saved as well. The building that I just showed you earlier, the Hollandse Schouwburg, I'm going to share again in the presentation. Let me see. Oh, just 1 second. Oh, I see that there's the website is also in English. That's fantastic. That's good news. So the Hollandse Schouwburg, the first picture on the presentation. So eventually, initially, this was a theater, and 2,000 Jews were kept here before they were brought to the Westerbork camp. And they were stuck. I mean, 2,000 people, right, like this. I mean, I said 2,000, I think this was 700 people, but 2,000 people were kept here with 3 toilets, waiting to go to the camp. But they didn't know that they were going to be killed. A lot of them thought they were just going to be working or something. And on the opposite side of this building, there is an orphanage. And between those 2 buildings, there's a tram. And what happened every time when there was a tram, they tried to smuggle children from here, from this theater, to the orphanage. For example, in carts with like laundry, for example, they would smuggle the kids in the laundry or in clothing. Of course, only if the parents were okay with them. And through the orphanage, children were saved. So this is one of the ways that some of the Jews were able to survive. And of course, there were people that were in hiding, or even some of them that didn't look that Jewish, so to speak, and had fake passports. So these are some of the ways that the Jews were able to get through the war. But nevertheless, I think most of you know what happened in the Second World War generally. I want to show you another quick video to give you an idea of Jewish life. And this is in Leeuwarden, a city just an hour drive from Amsterdam. This is one of the rare footages that we have to give you an idea of what the Jewish community was like before the war. Just gonna watch a little bit of it from a wedding. I don't think it has sound. Where? See. So again, this is not in Amsterdam. This is just one of the many communities that were outside Amsterdam. Now, so I wanted to spend some time on talking to you about things that you may not have heard about, because as I said, most people know how the Nazis went into Europe and just deported all the Jews, but there are some things that you probably have not heard about. One of the things is called the oxy-portugasia, that even in the Netherlands, very few people have heard about this. About the percentage that I want to tell you about, like how was it possible so many of the Dutch Jewish people were killed, really like 80%. And I also want to tell you a little bit about how my grandparents survived the war, just because I think to hear a personal story from people in the community is worth something. And it starts with this German person. His name is Hans Gallmeier, and he was in charge in the Netherlands to decide whether someone was Jewish or not. And this meant the difference between either living freely in the Netherlands or being deported to Eastern Europe. He was in charge of deciding whether someone was Aryan or not Aryan. And we'll go to the next. Okay, so basically what happened in the oxy-portugasia is you see these pictures on the right, pictures taken of people's face and from their profile. Basically, there was a group of Jews. They were the Portuguese Jews that lived in Amsterdam for 400 years, and they looked at the racial laws of the Germans, and they said, you know what? We know we're gonna die. However, maybe we can find a flaw in their rationale, in the way the Germans are looking at races, because they made some sort of a pseudoscience of it. You know, they said like the Jewish race looks like this, and this is the shape of their nose, and the shape of their eyes, and the shape of their face, and they were measuring skulls and everything. And the Portuguese and the Spanish Jews, they thought, you know what? We've been living in Spain for 500 years. We've only married with each other. We don't think that we are considered part of the Jewish race, because we are Spanish. We're Spanish and Portuguese. So for 2 years, they tried, together with other scientists and physicians and everything, and etc. They tried to make a file of them, proving that they were not part of the Jewish race. This is what's called the oxy-portugasia, and they made pictures and measurements and sounds things and cultural things, and they tried to tell Hans Kalmayer to prove to him that they were indeed not really Jewish in the racial sense. And for this reason, for 2 years, they were actually able to postpone their postpone being deported. But later, when it came to the person that works above Hans Kalmayer, he said very quickly, you know, these are all Jews, and then they were deported anyway. And maybe because of this, even more Portuguese Jews were deported, because they thought that it worked. They thought they were going to actually succeed, and so some of them did not have a plan B. And so in the end of the Portuguese community in Amsterdam, 90% was killed. So in the end, it may not have helped them at all, but it is something that almost nobody knows about. And also it feels a bit strange, you know, that people are trying to use this, but I mean, what other option do they have? Now, why was the percentage of murdered Jews so high in the Netherlands? I think this is important to discuss. Also, because I mean, why are we remembering on a day like this? Also to learn, of course, to learn from the past, to have a way to put the things that are basically not so hard to put into words, to give some words to it, to try to deal with our pain, to connect to each other, maybe to, you know, and also mostly to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So yeah, we have to learn from it. So yeah, why was the percentage of murdered Jews so high in the Netherlands? First of all, there was a lot of xenophobia and opportunism in the Netherlands. On one hand, the Netherlands has always been a very open society, very open. There have been people from all over the world for a long time. There was freedom of religion already in the 17th century, and this is why the Jews came there in the first place. As long as you were not Catholic, basically you were allowed to come to the Netherlands, and they loved the Jews for their context or business, for their money, but they didn't care so much for them as people. Like they always were the other person. But you know, as long they were pragmatic, as long as you don't bother us, you are welcome. But that's, you know, part of the Netherlands. So they were, sorry again for this. So they were welcome, but not really welcome. Then the quick surrender didn't help. Of course, the Netherlands surrendered after 5 days. So technically they were under German rule very early in the war. The high level of bureaucracy, as I mentioned earlier, everything was so well organized. And so if you wanted to know who the Jews were, you could just go to an office of the municipality and you could just see everything right there. You could see who they were, their memberships, everything. You could see everything. It was very easy. Something that you may also not know about is the Jewish Council. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to, by the way, sorry, I'm gonna put you onto the movie of Amsterdam in the 30s for 1 second and give him some quotes. Just give me, and then we'll continue. Just give me one minute. Here, we're gonna have a look. Here we go.
Sunset, sunrise, sunset, swiftly flow the days, sailing strand overhead to song clouds, blossoming even as we gaze. Sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset, swiftly fly the years. One season following another, laden with happiness and tears. What words of wisdom can I give them? How can I help to
Okay, and we're back from the commercial break. So, most of you are probably American, so you are very used to this. I've been to America once, or actually a few times, and when I watch television, every 5 minutes there's like this commercial break. It's like, welcome back, we'll be right back. So, but it's not, fortunately, it's not that bad here. Okay, so we are at why was the percentage of murdered Jews so high in the Netherlands? Now, there was something called the Jewish Council, something that also not a lot of people know about. There was already a Jewish Council in the beginning, who was just dealing with Jewish life and basically taking care of their needs and interests towards the government. But when the Germans came, they instated another sort of Jewish council, basically saying, making them in charge of all the Jews, first of Amsterdam and then of the Netherlands, and for them to be responsible for making sure that the Jews were following the German rules, the rules of the Nazis. So, for example, when they wanted the Jews to wear the star, the yellow star, the Jewish council was supposed to tell all these measures to the Jews and make sure that they would do it. They didn't really have a choice, but they did have such a council, and because of this, they were reaching all the Jews, and because they felt responsible, and also they were punished if they didn't listen. So they made the Jews basically, responsible for the others to also listen. So it was the Jewish council telling the other Jews to go to the German offices and apply to go to the camps and apply for the star and apply for all these measures to follow them. In the end, eventually in 1943 already, or 1944, the Jewish council itself was deported to the camps. So in the end, it didn't really help them to live longer, but they thought they were, first of all, they didn't have a choice, and second of all, they thought that maybe it would help. It would help them to use this power also to save some people, etc. It was really, really difficult. But this was one of the reasons why so many Jews were murdered. Of course, it's a very small country, the Netherlands or Holland, the way as you call it. So it's also more difficult to hide. The German police was, by the way, in charge of the camps and of deporting, which was not the case in countries like countries like France or Belgium or Spain. Then culturally, Germany and the Netherlands, they don't really share it, but the language is pretty similar. There's a reason why our language is called Dutch. You know, we live in the Netherlands. It's not like we speak Netherlandish, for example. We speak Dutch because originally there's this big area called Dietland, which is, the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium together, like a big country, and they share a common history, common language. They call Dutch a Germanic language. So the Germans, they saw the Dutch as more of a brother people. And sometimes also the other way around. So you would say that the Netherlands was more open to the German way of thinking compared to, for example, France. Also, the deportation in Amsterdam and the Netherlands started very sneakily. They really tried their best not to make people feel or to make them know that they were going to be murdered. They didn't tell the Jews, but also the non-Jews. They made it seem like they were just very friendly. They took them to Westerbork and they had like all kinds of entertainment there. And they really made sure in their propaganda to show that nothing bad was going on. This was different than in France and Belgium, for example, because they were doing this in an earlier stage and in a more subtle way. And also the resistance in the Netherlands started relatively late. So all these reasons together accounted for about 80% of the Jews being murdered in the Netherlands. Now I wanted to, other than that, I don't know what else you have to say about, 80% of the Jews being murdered in the Netherlands. There's really no words for it, but I want to tell you about what it did to our community. On the picture, you see a monument on the right. This is new. This was opened in Amsterdam only a year ago with 104,000 names. Every tile is a name of one person that was murdered in the Second World War. And again, they didn't include the ones that were killed after the Second World War, but still as a result of the war, or the ones that committed suicide, for example. After the war, there was a lot of hunger. Actually, some of it was done on purpose. For example, in Berlin, where there were still some Jews, and also some Jews came back, there was supplies of food, and they were put on fire on purpose by Hitler because he was disappointed with his people. And because of this, there were huge famines after the war, but also in other places, there was just not enough food for people, and people died out of hunger, even after the war. And of course, all kinds of diseases that people got during the war, after the war. There are many reasons why people died after, and they were not even included in these numbers. Also, I'll tell you about child murder later. Let me see. Give me 1 second because I see one sheet is invisible. So I'll fix it right now. Here it is. Yeah, okay, we're back. Invisible sheets. Yes, so the years after the war, the life for Dutch Jews was still horrible, sometimes even worse. It's not like when the Jews came back in 1945, very few were still there, most of them came back, that suddenly life was back to normal again. And this is something that a lot of people forget about. Even today, in 2023, the Dutch Jews are still fighting for justice. An example is the railroads, and that's the man that I showed you has been fighting for that, Salo Müller. So when the Jews were deported by trains to the east of Europe, they had to pay for their own tickets. The railways were paid for it, of course, by the Germans for this work, but the Jews had to pay for their own tickets. And Salo Müller, the man you just saw earlier, he went to the railroads and said, you know what, we demand retribution. We want our money back. That's the least that you can do for us. Give us our tickets back. And he succeeded. But only a few years ago, the railroads gave back some of the money that they made by then on deporting Jews. The ground lease in Amsterdam, but also in other countries where in other cities where Jewish people lived, there's a ground lease. If you have a house, you have to pay for the ground lease every year. And the Jews, when they were deported, and they came back, they got a fine for them to have to pay the ground lease for the time they were not in their houses. They were deported from their cities with help of those cities, and when they came back, they had to pay their ground lease for the time they were not there. And only a few years ago, Amsterdam gave back that money to the Jewish community, but other cities are still right now researching what happened and what they should do with it. Art, if you would Google today in Dutch, I even tried it this week. If you look for art, Jewish art that was robbed during the Second World War, even this year, even last year, Jewish families are still fighting for a lot of art that is still owned by museums, by just by people, by even by the parliament, the Dutch parliament or the Dutch royal family. They have art worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of euros by now that has been robbed by Nazis from the Jews, and they're still not giving it back. We're still fighting for that in 2023. On a more individual level, a lot of people were robbed from their passports after the Second World War. So they were out of the Netherlands, they came back from the camps, and their passports were not valid anymore. So you can imagine what that would happen, what that means. And they came back to if they were able to come back to their houses, most of their houses and most of their stuff and belongings, everything was taken, and most of the people would not give it back. So, I mean, they were alive, but that's it. Most of their family was gone. They don't have a passport. They don't have money. They don't have anything. There was no, it's not like anti-Semitism was suddenly gone, that everybody loved Jews again. There was no psychological help. So basically it was just really horrible. And they had to deal with all this basically by themselves. And even all of the memorials that we have now, or the events, they only started mostly in the 60s or 70s. So for 20 years, there was just a vacuum with people just trying to survive. And despite that, a lot of people from that generation have become very successful and contributing very much to the Dutch society or Jewish society. For example, Amsterdam is known for having a lot of Jewish mayors and politicians, but it did have a very big result on the mindset of the people here that I want to tell you a little bit about. To give you an idea of what the demography looked like, these are old numbers. We don't have really more recent ones, but they're more or less the same today. About 37,000 halachic Jewish people in the Netherlands. Imagine we had 140,000 already in 1940. So we're not growing. We haven't been growing for 70 years. Most of them live in Amsterdam, the majority. Also interesting, only 16%, more or less, is a member of a Jewish community. And about 80% is not affiliated with any Jewish organization. And actually, it's now more, right now in 2023, about 85% of the Jews are not affiliated with any Jewish organization, which is also insane. This is the infrastructure that we have in Amsterdam today, and most of our infrastructure is in Amsterdam. Outside Amsterdam, there's not that much. We have some synagogues, some schools, some rabbis, some restaurants, shops, clubs, student houses, all kinds of social, cultural, and religious communities. A community of Israelis that moved here, Israeli expats, and some youth movements. But generally, it's nothing compared to what we had before the war. But it's enough to to live a nice Jewish life in Amsterdam. It is. So what happened after the war? Some of the things happened to the community, and why only 15% is affiliated, and of those 15%, only a few percent is active. A lot of people quit Judaism. They didn't want to have anything to do with Judaism. They felt that God had forsaken them, or they were traumatized, or they felt unsafe, or they didn't tell their children that they were Jewish, or they had been hiding in non-Jewish families and they didn't tell them they were Jewish, and they grew up Christian or Catholic or whatever. They left the country, or they didn't have children because they didn't want to, they couldn't find a partner, or unfortunately, this is really insane as well, but a lot of Jewish people have been experimented on by Germans, experimented on their body, and because of this they couldn't have children, or because of just from diseases, or from not having enough food, all kinds of reasons. So a lot of them don't have much joy from their Judaism. Of course, a lot of trauma, and the center of gravity from their identity is in the past. The community is shrinking also because there's, of course, people making aliyah to Israel. There's assimilation, there's anti-Semitism. So basically, it's not very appealing to the young generation. And I mean, yeah, they don't feel fit in, they feel judged. It's a community full of trauma, emotional overload. So yeah, it's very difficult for the young generation to have a happy, positive Judaism in a community that is still suffering so much from the war. I mean, for me, I'm third generation, but I cannot even begin to imagine what it must be like for my grandparents to come back to Amsterdam in the situation that I just described, with only a few family members left, like 90% of their family being killed. And like, how do you start over? How do you say, you know what, we're still alive, let's rebuild the Jewish community? I mean, it's almost impossible. And I feel that we are now in the first generation that has at least enough distance from the past that we can actually really start looking forward. I can tell that in the community here, it's very difficult, not for everyone, but for most people to look forward. And by the way, my grandparents on my father's side, they were in hiding. On my mom's side, they were in camps. However, my grandfather had a British passport. I don't actually know why he had one, but it was very useful. And he worked for an international company called Philips, and they took really good care of their personnel. So whenever there were some like jobs that they needed to do, or like assemble things, they would make sure that the Jewish people were said, like, we really need them. So they were taken away from the camps or given like better jobs. And at 2 or 3 moments, when Jewish people in camps were assassinated, my grandfather was taken out of the line because they said, for example, everyone from Philips, you can stay, you can stay alive. So this is basically why he was able to get through most of the war. However, towards the end of the war, the Germans wanted to finish everything up quickly because they knew they were losing. And there were a few trains going to Auschwitz. And those were the last trains. And the Jews in there, most of them knew that the Germans were starting to lose the war. And they collected, in one of those trains, they collected everything they had, all kinds of belongings they still had, and they used it to bribe the driver of the train. And they made him go really slow, really, really slow. And fortunately, the country was liberated before the train got to Auschwitz. And this is why my grandfather, and actually most of the people that are in Amsterdam right now, they were in one of those trains. Most of the Jewish people and their children and grandchildren were on those trains. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to even tell this story. Yeah, it's really insane if you think about it. It's better not to think about it too much, actually, I think, only on days like these. So because of the situation that we're in Amsterdam, we took there are some new initiatives. The old establishment has been replaced by younger communities that are trying to take over, but the establishment still has the money and the buildings, but it's the younger organizations that are getting the people and that are finding, are refinding the joy in Judaism. These are the names of some communities that are doing that. Bendigamos is the name of my community. We started from scratch, but our main goal is just to grow the community again, to bring Jews together, to have a community, to build a community. And we do all kinds of things for youth, and parties, and for students, young professionals. During COVID, we were outdoors, all kinds of stuff with children, picnics, pizza in Sukkah with teenagers, ping pong tournaments. And so in this way, we try to focus mostly on the future and to invest in youth and in education, because in the end, I think the best way to honor the people that died for being Jewish is and I really believe that it's possible. The best thing we can do is to invest in the future, invest in youth, invest in making sure that the Jewish people will never disappear, but that we will grow again. And that's also my wish for all of us, that we will see how the Jewish people will continue to get stronger and more powerful, and that we'll see a lot of young people to take over our generation, like this little baby, that he's gonna grow up in a happy and positive growing Jewish community. So yeah, that's my hope. And I want to give you now the opportunity to ask questions. If you like to follow me or the community, we have a Facebook group and I have an email, and we have a Patreon where you can also follow our community and even support us if you like to. So you can be part of this story of reviving the Jewish life in Amsterdam. We still have a lot of work to do, but I'm positive that we can make a big change. Thank you for your time for so far. It was the first time I did a presentation about the war. Usually I just talk about communities and Chazanut and everything. But I hope you find it interesting, and I'm happy to answer your questions now.
Thank you, Nachshon. And I know this is a heavy topic, so thank you for diving into it with all of us. And I will just say we have a lot of questions, and we'll try to get to them, but please reach out to Nachshon if we don't get to your question. You mentioned that your grandfather somehow had a British passport. I have a few questions here about where did other Jews from Amsterdam flee? Was it, and did they create Jewish communities there that sort of have the traditions of Amsterdam?
Yes. So first of all, about where they fled, they were not really able to flee so well. Like when they were in Germany, they tried to flee to France and Belgium and the Netherlands. But when they were in the Netherlands and the war broke out, they didn't have so many options. Maybe you've heard about Jewish refugees trying to get into the United States, and they were blocked. They had to go back, especially in the beginning. Some of them tried to, I mean, Spain and Portugal has not really been there has not been very much Jewish presence since the Inquisition. So they didn't really have much options. Their best options were just going into hiding. Really, they tried to go away. Some of them were able to even get into Asia. I know some Jews were able to escape to China or Japan or South America, but those were exceptions. Most of them, they just had to stay inside and try to go into hiding. And also a lot of them only found out too late that things were much more difficult than they were. You know, right now, if you would, for example, you live in Ukraine, a lot of people didn't leave the country, or they're not allowed to, but at least they see very clearly there's a big war. They know more or less what Russia is trying to do, and then you can make a decision where to go. It's not easy, but you know what's happening. But in the Netherlands in that time, first of all, war was very common. I mean, it's actually uncommon for us not to have a war for 80 years in Europe, but there were wars all the time. So they didn't think something like this was happening, like a complete genocide. They didn't see it coming. So a lot of them were not even escaping. It was only too late when they found out, and most of their options were just to hide. And the Dutch people were offered 7 guilders and 50 cents, which would now be about $50, I think, if you convert it to today's money, if they would rat on a Jew. And when you're in a country where there's not enough food, it's something that and also if you don't really like Jews, this happens often.
Thank you. I saw a few questions in the chat about acts of resistance, and I know that you mentioned Phillips and some acts, but was there anything organized? Can you talk a little bit more about the strike that existed for a few days?
Absolutely, yes. So I didn't mention that much about the resistance. I said that the resistance started later in the Netherlands, and it wasn't as strong as in other countries, because after the strike, the Germans were very clear on that they didn't tolerate it. So the truth is the resistance was not so strong in the Netherlands. We had resistance, of course. You know, there were groups trying to do attacks on the Nazis. They're trying, as I said, there was this one attack on the municipality where they have all the files of people, and they were helping people with hiding. But generally, it was a very small group, definitely there were people trying to hide them and to resist, but you cannot really say that the story of the Netherlands was a story of resistance. Mostly it was a story of collaborating. And definitely, I mean, if you Google for the Dutch resistance, you will find some, and you will find some people that helped other Jews to, to be in hiding. But generally there was not much resistance. There has been, but it's not very significant. By the way, I see that there's a few remarks to me, like personally chat, so you cannot see it. One person asked what a oxy-portugasia is, but I think I mentioned earlier the oxy-portugasia was the Portuguese Jews trying to negotiate with the Germans, telling them that they were not part of the Jewish race. And someone said, like, I can't find any information on it. That's why I said, like, it's very unknown. This is why, I mean, I wanted to share this with you because almost nobody knows it. Even in the Netherlands, very few people know about it. There was a book published about this a few years ago.
Thank you. And if you missed part of the presentation, this recording will be shared. So if you have more questions, please rewind further or earlier in the presentation, and you'll be able to find more on that. I think it would, in our last few minutes, Nachshon, if you could share, I know you're going to Hashoah commemoration today in Amsterdam. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about how that came about and what that will look like?
Yes, of course. So I'll show the picture for it. Yeah, I'm going there later. So we have a memorial in the Netherlands for the Second World War. It's on May 4th. On May 5th, we have the Liberation Day, Dutch Liberation Day. And so the night before is when we commemorate the victims of the Second World War. But actually, by now, over the past decades, the memorial became more about all victims of wars in the history of the Netherlands and its colonies. So for this reason, for the 4th of May doesn't really feel much as a Jewish memorial. I mean, it's also about the Jews, but it's like about everyone. So it's about no one. And this is, we call it like the de-Judaization of the memorial, which is a very strange feeling. So this is why most Jews don't really feel much for this memorial. I mean, we're silent for 2 minutes and we go there, maybe yes, maybe no. But Yom HaShoah is really just about the Jewish victims of the Shoah. And it's all the Jewish organizations, main Jewish organizations together, like 35 organizations together. They are there. There's the mayor is there. There's a speaker, usually someone who is a victim, who has been a survivor and a young person. There is some prayers. It takes about an hour, and there's also always children that are doing some sort of ceremony with candles and saying some words. And this is for the Jews in the Netherlands. This is the real memorial of the Shoah. Yeah, and every year, and it's now in the Portuguese synagogue because this is being renovated. In the Portuguese synagogue, it has 1,600 seats, and it's really the main Jewish building in the country. So surely everyone who visits Amsterdam has been there, and it's from 1675. So it's spectacular.
There are so many more questions in the chat, but we are at time. So I really encourage everyone to check out Bendigamos and an email Nachshon if you have any additional questions that we didn't get to today. Nachshon, I'd love to invite you just to share quickly what Bendigamos means, and I think that would be a lovely note to end on.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'll finish with that. And actually, I think it's also a name of hope in a sense. You know, the Jewish life in Spain and Portugal, because this is where it started, was ended almost completely after the Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition was perhaps even more influential in Spain than the Second World War was in other countries, because basically the Jewish life stopped completely after the Spanish Inquisition in Spain and Portugal. And the Jews from there, the ones that were able to, they fled and arrived eventually in Amsterdam in the early 17th century. And they had a symbol for their community. It was a phoenix because it has risen from its ashes. Now, Bendigamos, the name of my community, because it's also the Spanish and Portuguese community in tradition. It's for all Jews and everyone is coming, but this is where we come from. Bendigamos is the name of a song that was basically a summary of the prayer after the meal, the grace after meal. The Jewish people in Spain and Portugal were not allowed to study the Torah or to learn Hebrew, so they had a Spanish song called Bendigamos, which was like a summary. Bendigamos, let's praise God together. Let's sing to God together. Let's bless him. Let's praise him. And back then we had to sing it because we didn't have a choice. But now we're singing it, as a sign that we survived it and we're still here. And this is why it's the name of our community, because it shows where we come from. It shows that we can, we're still here, and it means togetherness. Let's be grateful together. So yeah, that's the name of our community, and we're very happy to see after 8 years that we've become one of the largest communities in the Jewish Netherlands, and we know we can be 10 times bigger as if we just have enough means and room and time to talk to all the Jews in the Netherlands that want to be affiliated. As I said earlier, 80% is not affiliated, and this is mostly because the establishment has not been able to create a community that has been interesting and exciting and fun and happy, and because they were too much caught up with their own pain. And this is what we're trying to heal and to change. And we see that there are so many people just waiting for someone like us to welcome them back and say, hey, this is also your community, and what can we do to make you feel home? So
well, thank you so much, Nachshon. I echo everyone in the chat saying thank you. This was a very important Yom HaShoah presentation, and I know I appreciated learning from you. So
thank you
thank
so
you
much.
all for being here.
Thank you, everyone, and have a meaningful Yom HaShoah.